In fact, on the very day, April the 15th, that the decision came down from Barbara Crabb, that very day, a tweet went out from the White House assuring Americans, we will continue to have this National Day of Prayer, which we thought was really disrespectful. Disrespectful of a federal judge, and of course disrespectful to those of us non-believers as well as believers who feel like outsiders and don't feel it's the business of government to pray. So Obama did appeal right away. His administration wants to fight the National Day of Prayer. I don't know what's going on in his mind, and it's probably irrelevant to the law. I'm guessing that perhaps it would look better if he could say, I was forced to do this. I was forced to stop it, rather than him eagerly wanting to stop the National Day of Prayer. Maybe there's a good political reason for that. But in any event, our victory has been appealed to the Seventh Circuit, which is in Chicago. And if we prevail there, and by the way, we've had some good results out of Chicago on other cases of ours. The Hine decision, which went to the Supreme Court in 2007, which was challenging George Bush's faith-based initiative. That decision went through the Seventh Circuit in Chicago as well. And Judge Posner, who's a Republican conservative appointed judge, wrote a great decision in our favor. Very strong. He said, imagine if the president wanted to build a mosque right there in the Capitol, what would stop that kind of a violation? So we're not too worried about the Seventh Circuit because Judge Crabb wrote a good decision, and she anticipated all these arguments. She anticipated, in fact, she even mentioned the federal holiday of Christmas and of Thanksgiving. She mentioned those things, saying that in her mind, Christmas and Thanksgiving have enough of a secular aspect to them. In fact, in our minds, we know that Christians stole Christmas from the pagans. We know that, and most of you know that. Weren't the pagans originated right in this area here somewhere? Didn't they? Isn't it all your fault? And she is right about that, because a lot of atheists in the United States and maybe in the rest of the world do celebrate, quote unquote, Christmas, but not as a religious holiday, as the natural holiday that it is, the winter solstice, the day when the sunlight is the shortest, and when we want to bring evergreens in to anticipate the green of spring, and we want to have gifts. And like Robert G. Ingersoll, the famous 19th century agnostic orator, said he'd be happy with 3 or 4 Christmases a year, any chance to party, This is what we all, we like the season for all the F words, food, family, fun, fellowship, and whatever else. And Judge Crabb said that those holidays are not excluding anyone, even though it's called Christmas. We all know that it's a pretty secular thing. But a National Day of Prayer is specifically tailored by religious people with a religious purpose, with a specifically evangelical religious purpose, to promote religion by our government. That crosses the line. If we prevail in Chicago, which I'm guessing we will, then it's up to the U.S. government to decide whether to petition the U.S. Supreme Court then to overturn their loss. And the best guess is that they will. And in that case, we'll probably lose. In that case, the U.S. Supreme Court looks to be 5-4 against us right now. By the way, in the United States Supreme Court, do you know how many Roman Catholics are now sitting? 6 out of the 9 are Roman Catholic. And imagine, in a country which the colonists were vehemently anti-Catholic. The reason the separatists and the Puritans left England, the Anglican Church, because of the whore of Rome, the Pope, all that stuff. They didn't want the Anglican Church becoming so Catholicized. They were protesting. They were Protestants. They were protesting all of that. And there was a strong anti-Catholicism in our country for many, 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 many decades, early 20th century, and even up to John F. Kennedy. Remember when he was running for president, the first Roman Catholic president, and how nervous everybody was, and how he had to go out of his way to give that great 1960 speech to the Greater Ministerial Association of Houston, in which he said, I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where we the people run this country, which is a great speech, by the way. So, and it shows how much progress has been made in our country, that we don't have a religious test for public office, that we can have 6 Roman Catholics on the U.S. Supreme Court. Although, for those of us who are state church separation as purists, that makes us a bit nervous that there appears to be a de facto religious test for public office. In any event, we're not real confident, although our attorneys and we and other people are wondering if they do overturn it, on what grounds will they? What could they possibly say other than some wishy-washy thing about, tradition or whatever? Of course, the tradition only goes back to 1952. So we're going to watch this case. When we had our decision on April the 15th, our group really grew. Our group just started, people wanting to say, yes, we want to do something. It's nice to sit around and talk. It's wonderful. But to do something, to actually make a difference. And I would recommend to all of your groups the same thing. Let's talk. Let's get together and talk. But you know that old joke, after all is said and done, usually more is said than done. Let's do things. Let's be active. Let's be proactive. Let's fight. Let's defend the liberties that our societies have evolved into slowly, painfully, not always in a straight progression either. But let's defend those progresses that we've had. I have a couple minutes to talk about another current lawsuit we have that also happened in the 1950s. 1954, I think it was what it was. Back in the 20s, there was an issue about priests and ministers who lived on the church property who were provided housing, whether they had to report that as income. Usually you have to report that as income to the tax, right? There was a law passed saying that any priest who lives in a monastery or whatever who's given housing doesn't have to report that as income. Well, a lot of ministers, especially Protestant ministers, say, wait a minute, that's not fair. How come they get free living that's not tax-free and we don't? So in 1954, there was a bill proposed and passed that extended that to all, and this is the word they use, ministers of the gospel, quote unquote, ministers of the gospel, do not have to report their rent or their house payment as income. It's excluded from income, which lowers their tax liability in our country. And the law very specifically says it's so that we can help these ministers fight the powers of godlessness. This was in the 1950s, right? So it was a specific privilege given to ministers. And by the way, that phrase, ministers of the gospel, includes rabbis, believe it or not. Any clergy, anyone performing a sacerdotal function, cantors also can apply for this and get this, and they do. I used to do it. I used to not report my rent as income, and it lowered my tax liability. In fact, if there's a tax break, you'd be stupid not to take it. In fact, I know an atheist minister who's retired, Dick Hewitson. He was an Episcopal priest who was gay. He's now fighting for atheism and gay rights in San Francisco, and he's on an Episcopal pension, and he's still using that law. He does not have to report his housing, and he's kind of embarrassed about it as an atheist. But he says, hey, it's there. The tax break is there. I'm going to take it. So we're challenging that law. And in fact, the potential for abuse in that law is immense. Because now there's a lot of religious groups that are declaring different people to actually be clergy. The basketball coach at a Catholic high school is considered a minister of the gospel. And they don't have to report their rent as income. So this came to light, was it about 10 years ago? Pastor Rick Warren, this famous, the guy who did the opening prayer at Obama's inauguration. He wrote the big Purpose-Driven Life book. And by the way, my next book is going to be about a life-driven purpose, not purpose-driven life. That there is no purpose of life, and we should not want there to be. Because if there were a purpose of life, that would cheapen life. There's no purpose of life, but there's purpose in life. But that's another talk. Anyway, Rick Warren, way back then, was actually got his church to pay his entire salary as a housing allowance, so that he didn't have to report any of his salary. Talk about cheating the government. So he was sued, and he lost the case, except Congress very quickly moved to grandfather it, so that anybody before that time didn't have to pay back taxes. How convenient for him. And ruled that from that point on, it has to be a fair value. It has to be a fair market value. But one of the attorneys who was asked to give expert testimony, his name is Erwin Chemerinsky, who we just spoke with on our radio show this week actually. He was looking into it, and he says, well, okay, it's good that they have to pay fair value, but wait a minute, why are they getting this in the first place? Why are they even getting this break? Do we have a special class of privileged people up here in our country, we the people? Why are they treated differently? And he was unable to take the lawsuit. He became dean of UC Irvine's law school. And he was happy to hear when a group like ours decided, let's take that case. So we are in court now in California, challenging the parish exemption. And so far that's been flying beneath the radar. A number of churches and religious organizations have tried to intervene, because you know what's going to happen. If the ministers can't take that break, they're going to have to up their salaries, right? They're going to have to pay them more money, you know. Their poor, stingy God. He's so, you know, he can't find enough money to pay these people. In fact, if I were running a religious organization, I'd be embarrassed to admit that my God wasn't big enough to, you know, provide our needs. We had to go begging from the tax dollars to do that. So that is another one of the current cases that we're taking, as well as many others, with the pointed goal that God and government are a bad mix. We have a huge billboard in Colorado Springs, by the way, not far from Focus on the Family, that says that. God and government, a dangerous mix. And in fact, there are many sober religionists in our country and in the world who also agree with that. Greg Boyd, who's a megachurch pastor, agrees with us. America was not a Christian nation, and we shouldn't want it to be, because when you mix religion and government, they both get dirty. Keep them separate, keep them apart, and let us work in a secular environment to promote our causes for or against whatever religious point of view we wish to espouse. We have time for questions, or are we out of time?